Last week we were lamb, and we learned last week that championship teas sometimes don't even represent the very best teas that farmers have. We talked a little bit about branding and why branding's so difficult in the Wuyi Mountains. So this week we're going to focus a little bit more on geographical features and how they affect flavor. And we're going to talk about some recent history. And really what I'm talking about is within the last 100 years related to the Wuyi Mountains. So let's start off with shop news. What you've all been waiting for, which is for me to utter the following words, that we have a trip fully planned. We have a tentative price, which we'll announce on Wednesday. We'll have the price and the full itinerary available on Wednesday. So we're excited about that. We're just going over, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, making sure we've captured everything. So finally, we've gotten through this piece of the tasks that we want to do for the spring trip. Also, in terms of shop news, we had quite a few people that were new this week. So let me describe two of them. One of them came in, I'd say he was a chap around 35, 36, maybe a little older, 37, comes in and says, I want Iron Goddess Light. And he said it in Chinese, Tiguanin, and he isn't Chinese, clearly Westerner. And so immediately, this tells me one of two things. He either speaks Chinese, which was my very next question to him. Do you speak Chinese? No, I don't. Oh, okay. And that seems like maybe that's true and maybe it isn't, because he said it with the right tones, but I took him at his word. But more importantly, it told me that somehow he's connected to tea business or has some deep loving of Chinese teas. This was confirmed in his next question because I said, yeah, I have Iron Goddess Light. He says, I really like Wulongs. That's good. We have enough to cover your interests. I said, we have over 100. And I think that he misunderstood because he said, no, I like Wulongs. So nobody goes into a shop in the US and there's over 100 oolongs. So I know that he probably thought I misheard him. So I repeated, no, not only do I have 100 oolongs, because he followed it up, well, I want a cliff tea. And he said those exact words, I want a cliff tea. Okay. We're talking about somebody who really is invested in tea culture, is invested in some of the best teas in the world. So I said we had over 100. And this is where the misunderstanding came because he really had a hard time initially believing, oh my God, over 100 cliff teas. Once he got over that, I showed him the pictures of where we've taken people, and he's been to the Wuyi Mountains. That was the other thing that just really shocked me. And I said, finally, I said, are you in the tea business? No, I'm not, but I have been in the past. So in 2010, he opened a business trying to sell tea. And it lasted for a year or two. And predictably, it had some of the characteristics of why it's so hard to do this business. First off, he had limited supply. And one of the reasons he had limited supply had nothing to do with knowing where the supply was. It was just costly. And so trying to do it a bit at a time, sell some, make some money, go back and buy more, sell some, make some money, and repeat. Can't do that in this business. This business isn't sell a little, make a little, and then produce more or supply more. in order to be really successful in this business, you have to invest all the way. You have to get enough of an inventory that people can safely come back. Even if you run out of one thing, you have the second thing, and the third thing, and the fourth thing. And it's all of an equivalently great quality. So we marveled at each other because he said, gosh, you've really done what I wanted to do. And I marveled that he'd even attempted to do this and that he was still invested in trying to find the best teas. So that was a great experience. The other experience is one you've heard about before. You haven't heard about this specific experience, but the examples are legion within this shop. Young chap enters, probably 28, 29, or 30. He's brought in by friends who are showing off the shop. And he was cautious because he didn't really recognize the names. But we got him to where he needed to be because he said, you know, my palate is a heavier palate. So all you need to tell me. Put him into a heavier roast oolong. He loved it. 2 days later, back in again. And he said the magic words. He said, yeah, I like that. I want a different flavor, but I like that style. And I've been to quite a few other tea shops in the last 2 days. Nothing close to what you have in terms of flavor profiles and in terms of just the quality of the experience. So those were two great experiences that we had within the tea shop this week. And like I said, we're this close to being ready to go with the tea trip. So we're very excited. All right, so let's launch into Paragon. So last week, oh, and I apologize. I'll tell you, December's always a rough month for us because we're getting the tea memberships ready for next year. I'm going to list a bunch of excuses of why I was late sending out the photographs. I sent out the photographs this morning. I have about 1,001 excuses. Should have sent it out earlier, yesterday, but better than nothing. So last week I sent you a map and a map of the area, and we're going to talk about a place called Ma Toyan. So Ma Toyan, if you look on your map, if you get that map up again, it's in the southeastern quadrant. So look in the center, look down, look to the right, and you'll see a place labeled Matoyan. We're going to be in that area today. So what's special about that area? Why is it called, that translates, by the way, Horsehead Cliff or Horsehead Mountain? So there's several reasons for that name. One is that when you're in the valley, because it is a valley area, and you look up, you see 5 mountains. And these 5 mountains are right next to each other. And if you use your imagination slightly, they look like horse heads. And so, hence the name, Horsehead Cliffs. So that's where we are. What's the history? What's the recent history? And how is that relevant to you as a tea drinker? Well, the recent history, let's start in 1949. Communists come to power. Is China vigorous and strong and full of wealth at that time? And the answer is no. They're recovering from World War II. They're recovering from an internal civil war. People are impoverished. The government is struggling to find the right way, the right balance, how to get everything moving again in a good way. So one of the things that was a thought pattern is let's make people's living standards immediately better. Let's move them from places that are very isolated, dominated perhaps by a rich landlord and then a bunch of impoverished peasants, and let's get everybody on approximately equal footing. So they moved a lot of the farmers into and created residences at the temples in the Wuyi Mountains. Kicked out the nuns and monks and so forth and said, no, we're going to use this on, as it turned out, a relatively temporary basis, a 20 plus year basis. But nonetheless, eventually those went back to being temples. In the meantime, in 49, and as China developed, this gave centralization. It gave a chance to get everybody on a little bit better economic plane. And that's why they went through this process. Now, along the way came other changes. And those other changes, particularly as time went on, actually had an effect on what was growing there. How so? Scientists tried to introduce some varietals, and these varietals were native, and that's a whole different discussion. And last week we started that discussion, and then after we concluded the session, I was reminded to think a little bit more deeply about being native. So what I mean is, in this particular instance, when I say native, those varietals were growing already in the Wuyi Mountains and had been for as long as anybody could remember. So from that perspective, they were native. And scientists had said, okay, there's this one varietal in particular, it produces more, the yield is higher than every other varietal. And so that led, particularly in Maotoyan, and envision a place that's full of valleys and ravines, and then has these mountains just coming out of the ground that surround it. So that led to some traditional varietals being rooted out, and these new, not new, but a particular varietal which was a higher yield to become more dominant in that area. So each era in history produces changes, some artificial like this, and some that evolve over time. So that's what happened in this area. Did every farmer root out all the original varietals? No, they did not. But it led to a greater number of those farmers actually producing this varietal. And Paragon belongs to this varietal. So let's think then a little bit about the actual physical terroir, the geography. So you have 5 distinct districts, not districts, 5 distinct sub-areas in the Horsehead region. And those 5 distinct areas are distinguished by how they look. So one area has a lot of weathered soil, pretty loose topsoil, and that's the characteristic of that. An adjoining area has semi-weathered soil. It has more gravel, has a little bit of yellow soil. The next area has a little bit more red soil, and so on. So you have 5 areas which have some differences. Geographical, distinct enough that if you walk through, oh yeah, this looks different. How about the weather terroir? What's going on with that? Well, it depends where you are, because some of the plants are in the ravines, some are on the sides of the mountains. What happens in the ravines? Let's attack that first. In the ravines, they get less sunlight. Does that make a difference in the final result of the tea leaf? Oh my God, it does. What's the characteristic? The tea leaves tend to be more waxy. They tend to hold more moisture. And holy cow, when you process them, you got to use a heavier hand. Who knew that a mile away, if they're up on the mountain and they're getting more sunlight and a little bit less moisture, those leaves have less moisture and they come out less waxy. And as it turns out from a flavor profile, you get more floral, you get more of a from those tea leaves. So usually when we're thinking about tea leaves, we're not thinking about all these differences, are we? And we're not understanding that these are grossly huge areas for which there's many micro terroirs in these areas, and therefore, hence my blank face when people come in and say, yeah, I want Darjeeling. Does that make any sense to me? I want Wuyi Cliff tea. Does that make any sense? It makes a relative sense, but my question is always follows with what flavor specifically about what you've had do you like? If you're able to describe the flavor to me, I will get you to the tea you need. So, and that's why, because the two areas that I just described in the ravine and on the cliff had both a different geographical, in other words, the earth itself was different, the sunlight was different, varietal was exactly the same, different flavors. And you had to use a different processing modality. These farmers are smart. I talk about lineage processing. This is what I mean. You're probably wondering, isn't it true? I can hear the question formulating in your minds. Isn't it true that grandma or grandpa wrote down the recipe and they passed that down? Maybe there was some changes along the way that the younglings made to the recipe, but they always noted it. As far as we can tell, and as far as tea historians can tell, the first real written complete record for Wuyi Cliff teas started in 1938 and was concluded in 1942. Holy cow. This thing, which was invented in the 1500s at some time, just kept going by its own momentum. This set of farmers in this magical place all the way into the 1900s. No notes. Everything was, you master this by watching, and year after year you watch, you're given a small amount to do. At the conclusion, this is not very good. This is not what we do here. And year by year, the successors work and work and work. And finally, one year, the elder says, yep, you made it. No more lessons. You're in charge. That is prototypically how China, in all areas where you had mastership of either scholarship or art form or craft tea, that's how it was passed along. You look, you do. You look, you do, until the result replicates the original result of the elder. Once you replicate, you're an elder. You're not an elder so much as you're a master. You're acknowledged, and you don't need any more education, so to speak. That's how it was looked at. And whether it's in the art form or in the tea form, tea craft tea form, Same way, same thinking. A scholar, same thinking. This was Chinese cultural tradition. This was brought home when I was talking to people who are trying to grok why what we do here is so different and how come it's not easily replicated. This is part of the situation. We understand how this developed, and therefore, when we go to these places, we know who to look for. We know when I talk about lineage tea, that's what I'm really talking about. You have lots of enthusiastic younglings who say, yeah, I'm going to do tea. Just like here, you have lots of enthusiastic people who say, wait a minute, I'm pretty good. I grow great rosemary. I grow great potatoes. Why can't I grow great tea? Maybe you can and maybe you can't. Remember, we're not talking about the growth, or actually we are talking about the growth because you have to understand where you are and the results of what you do in relationship to where you are and then how you process. The processing is the key here. You understand your geography, you understand your microclimate. And so think about this. What about the farmer who has 8 different small patches in different places in the Wuyi Mountains? Now, all of a sudden, you get it. There's 8 different lineages, 8 different streams of knowledge that they have to have internalized to know how to process by area. And again, this is why it's so confusing, because people think, well, wait a minute, it's this varietal. Shouldn't this varietal taste the same across every small plot that it's produced on? And the answer is it absolutely does not. And the reason is because of lineage. So that's a really important point to walk away from today, because so many times people come in. So I told you last week about this guy who lives in Arizona, and the question his sister asked is, well, why don't I recognize these names? So my real response to that, although I didn't say this because, it's hard to hear it this way, but my real response is, okay, if I named every tea here the exact varietal name, would you know what you're ordering? Would you know how to order? Would you be able to distinguish? And the answer is absolutely not. And this is why people get so confused and think, well, Christ, how am I supposed to understand these teas? Well, we've actually made it easy for you because each distinctive flavor has a distinctive name. And that's what counts, because when we fulfill again an order, we make sure we're in the same flavor profile. How do you do that? You have to normally be right within that terroir, both the microclimate and the physical climate. Whoops, that's probably not a word. It sounded good though, and it had more than 8 letters. The geographic conditions and the weather conditions have to be nearly identical. They can't be exactly identical, right? Exactly identical is like saying every year here in Northern California, the weather is within a 2% tolerance. It is not. And therefore, the results of what rely on the weather have to be different. And again, this will help you who are thinking about these issues deeply and thinking about, well, okay, we have global warming. How much is that really going to change things? Well, let's think about this region, the Horsehead region, for a second, and think about what it has been looking like for the last decade. So you, on average, have about 170 days of fog a year. What does that mean in the ravines? This is really important. It means you have rocks seeping water all day long because they've gotten moist. How about on the cliffs? Is it seeping water? No. So when I said the moisture in the leaves in the ravines was more, there's a real physical reason that it's more. And the farmers understand this. The old farmers. Young farmers don't. Young farmers, unless they're smart, and we've encountered some really smart young farmers, they first go around to the elders and say, hey, we're a little new to this. Show me what you got. And the elders, especially when they get to be of village elder status. And what I mean is they're in their 70s, 80s, and they really don't do much production physically themselves, but they watch and they make sure that their production, they tend to be able to tell the stories, and they tell those stories in a way for which younglings can start to learn the process of what do I have to pay attention to? What do I have to think about when I'm processing? What else is important in the geographic situation? Are there forests? If there's bamboo forest, there's a different effect because roots chat with each other. There's a different effect on the flavor. Those type of leaves can't be roasted as heavily as leaves that are next to a broadleaf forest. Those type of leaves tend to be easier to handle. Oh my God, it gets down to the neighbors. Is my neighbor helping me, or is my neighbor creating a situation which is going to be harder? Farmers who are experienced know that. And everybody who is in the production team is letting me know that I am talking too long, which is absolutely true because you're very thirsty. The production team is fully thirsty. You're all thirsty. So let's change places here and let's see if we can have a Paragon performance in brewing the tea. So we're over here and you're looking at someone who is not the tea master. You're looking at the understudy. And you'd rather be looking at a beautiful, accomplished tea master. Numinous also. The tea master reminded me what I left out. A numinous tea master instead of a flat understudy.
Thank you.
Biju.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So we do, the Wuyi tea. So that's tea from the Matoyan in the village. Okay. So we familiar this tea, but I every day in the village. So okay. So just help me. So
Yeah. So the usual setup, except Biju must be in a really great mood because 3 pots all lined up, 3 cups all lined up. All you need is 1 brewing vessel, whether it's Nishing pot or ceramic, and 1 cup. We're doing a lot of stuff here, so we need 3 cups. We are on a tray which is easier to handle to control the water. We're using 200-degree water. We're pouring the water both inside and outside the pot. Why in the world would we pour in both places? I mean, I can understand pouring in the pot because you want the pot to be clean and so forth. What about outside the pot? The reason we pour outside the pot is we want that heat. The Wuyi Cliff teas at this level need lots of heat. When they get that heat, you get a better flavor. And this is really because of the level of processing that goes into these, especially what we're getting. Naturally, inside, you want to make sure there are no leaves that are stuck in the sieve inside. You don't want any accidents with that. Tea Master is making absolutely sure that there are no leaves that are stuck in the sieve. Because what happens is if you do two different varietals and one of them gets stuck in the sieve, as you're tasting a second one, you're thinking, wow, that's a little off. Well, there's a reason it's off. When things are off, you check the reasons because in this shop, it's not the tea. One of the important things to notice is Tea Master rhythm. So, does Tea Master rhythm have a definition? In other words, well, you take 15 seconds to pour water in each cup. And the answer is no. You all have in you Tea Master rhythm. And what it is attention to detail, making sure that you capture every single detail at your replicatable pace. All right, Tea Master is drawing 200-degree water.
这个到底是 release style 啊 ？Yeah，
什么意思？
是当地的泡法。
I see. Okay. So remembering that our methodology for brewing this tea is based on the methodology that they use in the Wuyi Mountains. And although they use small cup, our magic is we've made it Western. We've made it large cup.
Question came in. I don't know if it's a funny one or not. These cliff teas aren't as dark as the other teas, I think. But
Great question. So somebody took a look at the leaves. I assume that that's what they did. Took a look at the leaves and said the leaves aren't as dark as I presume other cliff teas that we have in here. Remembering, and you'll be surprised, we've had cliff teas where the leaves are greenish yellow. So there is no standard for what the leaves should actually look like because it depends on the varietal. It should be uniform by varietal, but by varietal, it also should be different than other varietals because other varietals are large leafed. Also, even within the same varietal. Remember what I just said about is it growing in the valley or is it growing in the mountain? There is a difference. And how you roast is different. If it's growing in the valley, do you have to roast more or less? The answer is you absolutely have to roast more. It's the leaf again, waxier, the moisture more. You got to work harder in some ways. Harder has its benefits, though. All right, so Tea Master has put the tea leaves in the teapots. Understudy is putting the timer on. 3 minutes. The amount for this particular tea is 5 grams. I hope you have your notes out from Lamb because this is very different. And yet, without question, it's a cliff tea. So you notice Tea Master again has this nice rhythm, not in a hurry, just making sure that she pays attention to all the details. It's a really great rhythm. Yeah. And I'm setting the time. Mm. Yep, slow, rhythmical. So she's making sure that each of these pots gets the water in them. And I'm calibrating the time to make sure that we do this correctly, because each one has a timer. I want to make sure that I capture this correctly. Okay, we're getting there. You notice just that steady rhythm. And you also notice that she's pouring on the outside again. Remembering, yeah, 3 minutes for each one. Remembering that the tea leaves, more than anything, when they're in the brewing portion of the program, they appreciate heat. You make it too low, say you do 180 or 190. Yeah, you're going to get some flavor without question. And the flavor won't be bad, especially these, but it won't be the best. It won't be as distinctive as when you use the 200-degree water. So these teas roughly go through the same process. However, I already indicated to you in the introduction that nothing was ever written down. So when I say roughly, again, it's through lineage. So the farmers come to do what their fathers did, and their father's father, and their father's father's father. Now, do these farmers ever make changes? And the answer is yes. Why do they change? Lots of reasons. One, sometimes scientists come to the farms and say, hey, if you just did this, you're going to get a better yield or you're going to get better protection. It's going to be better for you. Okay, that's the first one only. All right. The first timer has gone off. Tea Master is using tea rhythm, pouring in a steady way. Wow, and producing a beautiful result. 他们时间都不一样. Whoops. Now that you were not supposed to do. So for those of you who saw me spill it over the side, that was because I was trying to do 4 things at once. Don't do that. This is very hot. Pay attention to what you're doing because you certainly don't want to spill 1 drop of this. All right, second timer has gone off. Tea Master's creating a second cup. And again, just see the steadiness of approach. And you notice that last little maneuver where the tea master makes sure that there's no drops left in the teapot. Why is this? Because you want to be able to make a second brew for this, second pouring. If you make a second pouring and you've left water in, you won't have caused the whole process to be disturbed, and you're going to get a different flavor than what you expect for a second brewing. Each pot, you notice, has its pouring rhythm as well. It's really fun with these pots because they all have different characteristics. And especially with the super premium pots, those things completely different characteristics. And you see this pot here, it poured more slowly, but just steady, just beautiful. All right. So this is the color of Paragon. It is a beautiful, beautiful brownish amber. Beautiful color. Let's enter the quality arena. This is very hot. You're not entering, by the way. I'm entering. You'll enter in a minute. This is very hot. So I'm going to take an inhalation. And that inhalation is a 200-degree inhalation. And I'm going to coat my tongue as best I can, very carefully. I'm going to taste, not taste, but get the feel for the astringency. I'm going to look at aftertaste. I'm going to try and evaluate energetics. I'm going to take a second one. I'm going to try and do the same thing. And in addition to that, I'm going to think about aroma and taste. And remembering this is really 200 degrees, so you have to be careful. So it's your turn to brew.
Yes. And
You notice the tea master is really, really careful to make sure that all the tea leaves are out. And you need to do the same if you're using, whether you're using a clay pot or a ceramic. If there's an internal sieve, sometimes those holes will catch a leaf, and you have to pay attention to that.
There's 3 smaller pots in the tray now.
Yeah, I'm looking at those too. How do we understand those 3 smaller pots? A decoration. In other words, the tea master is very proud to show off 3 beautiful small pots that we've gotten over the years. We have endless fun with pots. Some pots are not practical for normal usage. The main pot for large cup tea, is very practical. These other pots would be used more for the Kung Fu style. When you're sitting around, you have a couple hours at a time, you're going to use 9 or 10 grams. Say again? Yeah. And we actually replicate many of the steps of Kung Fu tea with these large pots.
First comment coming in, when the dry leaves met the hot, wet walls of the pot, I detected a zephyr of sweetness.
I love zephyrs. And sweetness combined with sweetness, what can go wrong when you have a zephyr of sweetness? Love the description. Love the that thought about sweetness. This tea definitely has that aroma.
Which aroma of the warm leaves reminds me of dark chocolate.
So we have hints of chocolate, dark chocolate, aroma of the warm leaves. So we're getting sweetness and chocolate. This sounds like a prototypical Cliff tea, a real Cliff tea. And the answer to that would be yes. Oh, yes. And setting the timer for 3 minutes. So Somebody asked me a question this week, and I realize I probably haven't explained this before. So here we have a leaf from Paragon, and it's in my hand. This is one that was used to make the initial cup. And remembering that this tea overall belongs to the category of Wulong. So what does Wulong mean? Literally black dragon. And why is it called that? Look at this leaf. It's twisted. It looks almost like a dragon. And hence, in the people's imagination, that's why this got this name of Wulong, Wulong tea. Yes.
Even in the bag, there was a hint of chocolate and umami as they entered the heated pot, a strong scent as emitted. The wet leaves reminded me of walking in the forest after a rain, and the flavor was of honey, caramel, and chocolate. Yummy! Exclamation point.
Ah, indeed. Honey, caramel, chocolate, umami, wet forest. Is there anything better than that? That was the wet leaves. Did I miss anything from the dry leaves?
No.
Okay. So yes, I hope you're taking good notes because remember, this is distinctly different from lamb. This lamb, from our perspective, absolutely a championship tea that was never entered as a competitor. That's because the farmer entered another tea, but we felt, and the farmer felt, that lamb was the true jewel. This is not lamb, but it's outstanding for what it is. Paragon, as a matter of fact. And if you ask me, is there any difference in the processing modality? In the big picture, the answer is no. But that's like, and Rob has been demonstrating week after week. Is there any difference between what he does and what bakeries do? Well, there's a huge difference. They're all doing bread or they're all doing a wheat product. But his attention to craft detail produces a result that is so astoundingly different. You think, oh my God, he's added 5 or 6 extra steps. And the answer is no. What he's done is he's been careful and he understands reasons behind each step. Same with the farmers. Same with the farmers. Your timer went off, presumably. Separating the tea leaves from the tea water. Making sure all the liquid is out. And yours should look something like this. Again, this beautiful, beautiful color. This is so fun to make these teas because each one of them is a little bit different in color. The leaves are a little bit different. And some of you already have commented on the coloring of the leaves as being different, and absolutely true. And this is what it means to be in tea rhythm because you're able to look at the leaves and say, ah, there's something different about these. And yet, as a class of teas, as soon as you taste this, you know, oh, this can only be Cliff tea. And when you really taste into it, it can only be great Cliff tea. And more importantly, it can only be Cliff tea from in the mountain.
The tea water smells like caramel, honey with a hint of corn. Maybe it's popcorn with butter.
Tea water, hint of corn, maybe popcorn, caramel with a little butter. So what this commentator is talking about is a richness of flavor, a roastiness and a richness of flavor together, and a sweetness. And everybody has talked about it. The commentators so far have talked about hints of honey in the aroma in the leaves.
And compared with lamb last week, the minerality is not as present as quickly. It's softer.
Love this. The minerality. So one of you got out your notes from last week and compared and noted, and this is duly noted here. The minerality is not as forward as it was last week. Lamb, that rock charm led, the minerality led with the tea. The tea led with the minerality. Here, the minerality is secondary.
The minerality is not as forward as lamb. Another comment around that. The mouthfeel is drying yet smooth. I find this tea to be grounding and improving my focus.
Oh, this is great. So we got a feeling out of this. Grounding and improving focus. Not as the minerality, again, compared to last week, is not as forward. And there's just that real sense of groundedness in this tea. I like that because typically for cliff teas, many times we forget to talk about the energetics. And the energetics are important, as important with these teas as the other ones. And some of the cliff teas are stimulative without question, and some are grounding.
Next comment, the mouthfeel is smooth with an instant feeling of astringency on the tip of my tongue, seems to instantly feel warming.
Mouthfeel is smooth with astringency on the tip of the tongue and warming. Energetics are warming. Without question, the energetics are warming. And in some ways, and now I go out and limb, and this is personal. With lamb, because the minerality was so forward, I never got around much to the energetics. It didn't have that immediate sense of warming that this does. This one, right away, I'm sweating a little bit. I feel it in my belly. It is just comforting. So all of these teas, even though they're so different, are really mood changers. And what I mean by that is as you think about these and take really great notes, you realize some days you're in the mood for minerality, especially if you know it's coming. And some days, hey, I want something that's relatively easier to drink as a cliff tea, something that's grounding, something that's going to make me feel calm. This is almost one that if you're doing work, you could actually be doing work, reading, whatever it is, and this would, because of the grounding nature, make you feel, wow, I'm getting a lot done.
There's a lingering coating on the tongue that is thick, that persists after the astringency is gone.
Love this comment. On the tongue, you get that astringency, and for this observer, then there's this lingering sensation that is not astringency. It's like a coating on the tongue, the cliff tea coating.
This tea has a lot to it. It's heavier and calls me to drink much more slowly, or it would be too much.
Great comment. This tea is heavier, denser, and it causes this commentator to slow down because otherwise it would be too much. It's so interesting when we talk about too much because we can talk about lamb. If you drink that too quickly, the minerality is too much. Here, the density and the heaviness of this requires you to slow down and appreciate it. Great comment, by the way.
Closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, feel empowered by its slight sweetness and the warmth that is enveloping my body.
Drinking it closed eyes, this commentator
Feel empowered by
Fe-
its slight sweetness and the warmth that is enveloping the body.
feels empowered by the slight sweetness and definitely that warmth. Again, as I mentioned before, I'm perspiring. And it's not for any other reason aside from the fact that it is warm, very warm.
This commentator has been investigating their tea table. The wet leaves remain relatively small, while the leaves of lamb mushroomed up to fill the teapot.
Oh, great catch on this. Excellent look back at the notes. Yes, the lamb leaves definitely expanded. These, you're right. You look at these and it's like, gosh, these are so small. So this tells you right away, this is a different varietal. And it tells you right away that differences in varietal produce different results and not necessarily what you expect. So terroir, both physical and geographical and microclimate, all play a role in what the end result is going to be, especially if you're working with farmers who have lineage. If they have craft lineage, whatever varietal they're working with, they know what to do.
This comment is, I find this, like with a lot of the cliff teas, a different warmth. One starts even deeper and more fundamentally, almost beginning between the cells, and it just builds.
Oh, I love this comment. So warmth, which seems to develop between the cells. So it's different than warming of other teas, and it just gradually envelops the individual. And certainly, I get that. I'm actually, as I'm talking to you, I'm wondering why it is my shoulders feel so warm. The tops of my shoulders. I can't remember recognizing this feeling before. It's great when I'm doing this with you because I'm in tea rhythm also. And so both of my shoulders, right at the tops, have this warmth, and I have no explanation for this.
So time for our last comment. From start to finish, Paragon is an exciting experience. Wish I had time this morning to enjoy the second cup.
From start to finish, Paragon is an exciting experience. And this commentator says, wish that they had time to enjoy a second cup. This is a beautiful tea. I hope you took great notes today because your commentaries were absolutely spot on. And I especially like the fact you looked backwards at lamb as you were thinking about this and made comparisons. Now, after doing lamb and Paragon, gosh, what's left? Well, I think that next week we're going to do something called Phantasmagoria. And I am, for one, looking forward to what that's going to be like. So, your responsibilities this week. In the shop, we're aware of an uptick in bugs going around, flu, whatever. be careful out there. Take good care of yourselves. Bundle up warmly. It's gotten colder. And we very much look forward to seeing y'all next week. You take care now. Bye-bye.